something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware.
Well, good evening and welcome to another episode of Occupy TV. I have with me this evening Stacey, and we're going to talk about the city's Opportunity Eugene Homeless Solutions Task Force, which had its final meeting on Friday. And in a week or so, we're going to be presenting, or the task force will be presenting its report to the City Council. So, what happened?
Well, a lot happened, and it had its beginnings really back in December of last year of 2011 when the Occupy camp was shut down. And we'll be talking about the Occupy camp, which wound up having a lot of homeless folks in it later on in the program. But for now, just to say that it was both a popular and a very unpopular decision to close the camp. And so by doing that, the city, in an effort to show good intent, I think, to serve the homeless better, but also to pacify the many people who were extraordinarily upset that about 300 people had been kicked out into a very cold winter the day before Christmas. They made some promises. One was to start a task force, which we'll be talking about today. The other two things were to extend the Egan warming centers, to begin opening them immediately and run them for the rest of the rest of the year. As you know, those opened for 2 nights and closed. So that promise was badly broken. They also said they wanted to extend the RV camping and to add tents. And they've begun to do that. I think a very sincere effort has been made to complete that promise, and they completed the promise of having a task force.
Right.
I thought they did a really good job, and I think you would agree, you certainly were present at all of the task force meetings, in choosing people to serve on this in order to have a really wide diversity of people serving.
Well, to some extent, they did have a wide range of people. But my comment the first week that we met, I was not on the task force, and I sort of regret. Occupy had a bunch of spots that were, reserved for them for the task force, and I probably could have pushed a little harder to get on there, and kind of wish that I did. I think that would have been an improvement in the process. But I did videotape them all, which to a degree has kept them honest, and especially recently.
Right.
And but my sense was I would have liked to have seen more people who were opposed to the task force be present for the task force. We had a lot of service providers, people who've been working with the homeless for a long time, who are well aware of these particular issues. We had representatives from the police, we had representatives from the city, from the faith communities, and so on. It was, fairly diverse group, but there were only a couple of business people who were there, and I would have liked to have seen more people from the business community, and also some people who were opposed to Occupy in general. In other words, some of the people who were sort of on Occupy. It might have been good to get them in there.
I think it would have been excellent. I know the mayor did make a sincere attempt to get more business people in, but as is unfortunate, not just here but throughout the United States, when people polarize and refuse to participate, then an incredible opportunity for gained understanding on the part of those who don't participate, and then for the folks who are kind of in favor of helping the homeless to understand why some people are not in favor of it. And it promotes isolation in your own ideas instead of cooperation. I think that's very true. I was saddened, for instance, that there were no more people of color. I think we had one man who was black, and we had some people who were Hispanic or partially, one woman, I believe, who had some Asian heritage. But then I thought, if we'd had a whole lot of minorities here, it wouldn't have been representative of Eugene.
No, it wouldn't.
Because we are not a town with much minority.
This is about as white a place as you can get.
It is.
And I think largely because For example, the Ku Klux Klan was very active in this area until recently. There were the sundown laws,
Right.
among other things, and that kept people out.
Right, and we could go on and on. We both have, I think, a lot of perspective on the issues surrounding race here and the refusal to even recognize that we have issues of race around
exactly.
here. But to focus a little bit more tonight on this task force and why was it necessary, other than as something to offer the community, kind of to say, oh, we're so sorry we closed down that camp. Well, we have, as you know, Joe, just an enormously increasing homeless population.
Oh, absolutely.
We think right now, just in Oregon, we have over 98,000 people who are homeless, and a lot of those are in Lane County. We have the biggest concentration per capita. These homeless, many of them fit probably the stereotype that a lot of people have. There are people who are mentally ill or people with addiction problems, and that's certainly true. The question is, why are they on the streets?
Well, a lot of the mentally ill wound up on the streets because of cuts during the 1980s
Exactly.
in particular.
And again in the 90s.
Yep, and it continued, starting, well, to some extent it started under Nixon, and then it subsided a little bit under Carter. But then when Reagan came in, drastic cuts to the social safety net for support of people who
Absolutely.
would have a hard time supporting themselves. And so
Right.
a lot of these people wound up on the streets.
Yeah, and many of them with the support system were working or were at least safe and also were absorbable into the homes of the family they were raised in. But without treatment, they couldn't even maintain their own homes with their parents and their siblings. So a lot of those folks wound up on the street. Also, of course, very recently, we've had these enormous layoffs.
Yes.
Again, people, through no fault of their own, lost jobs that they'd held for 20, 25 years.
Yep.
And suddenly, no job. I was astounded when we were at the Occupy camp to see women my age that were on the streets for the first time in their life. Some of the stories that we heard there and what the news tells us is another major reason for people being on the streets is that they've had a health problem.
Yes.
And with health costs so high, even those with insurance
Yeah.
can't make their co-payments.
Yeah, the statistics are that 4 out of every 5 bankruptcies is the result of a health problem.
Exactly.
And of those 4 out of 5, fully 4 out of 5 of those had health insurance, and the company refused to pay.
Right.
So denial of service is not just creating homeless, but it's actually killing people.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
literally.
in
It's
the-
kill them either because they can't get health care or kill them by putting them out on the street when they're totally unequipped to survive
Exactly.
there. It's,
But it's
either way you lose.
Years ago, I got involved in doing some speaking on single-payer health plans. And my presentation included the fact that at that time there were 29,000 people a year in the United States that were dying as a result of refusal of care,
Right.
denial of service.
And I think, yeah.
And today it's well
worse.
over 100,000.
Is it that large?
It is 4 times as much. The number of people dying from denial of service has increased by a factor of 4 in the last 5 years.
This, Joe, too, what you've just brought up, I think, is so important when people are always just bugging us. What's Occupy all about? Get a focus. Well, here we're looking at a situation that should just be about the homeless.
Yeah.
But we can't have this discussion without talking about banks and what they're doing in illegal foreclosure, without what the healthcare system is
Insurance
doing,
companies.
and insurance companies, and we'll be talking later about the whole policing issues that surround it. So that's what Occupy is about. It's this entire wrap of things that are going wrong, and you and I have had many discussion about that.
To summarize it, it's kind of concentration of wealth and corruption. In other words,
Exactly.
purchasing influence, the wealthy having enough power to buy, essentially the
Congress.
government. Congress, the president,
Supreme
the
Court,
government,
everything,
Supreme Court,
yeah.
pick it.
It's hard to stop at where they have quit
And
doing this.
And now with the Citizens United decision, where unlimited money can, flow in, unlimited corporate money can flow into campaigns. They're basically poised to buy the remaining pieces of the government that they don't already own.
Right, and we've talked a lot in Occupy about why are people so resentful? Why do they seem so hateful, many of them, and angry at the homeless? And I was talking today to a young man, actually he's not young, he's in his 30s, that I respect a great deal who's been homeless. And he said, it's fear, Gene. They're all so afraid that they're going to wind up in the same boat.
Precisely.
Everybody is so close to the edge. One paycheck or maybe two paychecks away from not being able to maintain their home. Yeah. So as we looked at this and as we brought all these people together, one of the first things we did was assess what had already been done in Eugene. And of course, we've had incredible programs here from St. Vincent's, the Mission,
Whitebird,
Cahoots, the Looking Glass Shelter Care. I mean, you can go on and on.
Yeah.
The entire structure of the Human Rights Commission. There's been a lot done here. The community has a lot to be proud of. But recently, all of that has deteriorated. Tax base has gone down, services have gone down. It's been interesting, the interplay between the services going down and policing going up. Yeah. And I want to talk again with you more about that later as we talk about how the homeless have been treated. It's interesting to look at what's been done here in Eugene, not only with the more formal services, let's call them, that are done in traditional structured ways. But back after the World Wars and after the Big Depression or during the Big Depression, we had homeless camps here, just as they did all over the country. But what most people don't remember is that back in 93, 94, 95, we also had homeless camps here out at Alston Stadium. It was run part-time by Shelter Care and part-time by Whitebird. Yeah. And when you hear about that camp, you hear the most astonishing things about how horrible it was and, rapes, murders, and suicides, basically. Yeah, right. And, of course, child molesters. And so we went back and dug through the records. George Brown on the city council did a lot of this research, and he found the old reports. I found some old articles in the Seattle Times. Yep. And it turned out that camp ran 1 year for only 3 months. It was a deep winter camp. And the next year it was unanimously funded by the city council. Yeah. Now, if it were this horrible nightmare, they would not have refunded it.
Precisely.
And we dug up the report, and it was actually quite glowing. And it turns out that Shelter Care and Whitebird didn't run screaming out of desperation from the area because it was so difficult. They instead said to the city council, this is a good thing. It's difficult, but it's a good thing. But we can't stay with it unless you're going to let us do it for 12 months. Because by the time we recruit people, we train them, we put them in place, the 3 months is almost gone. And they know status quo that's good as established. Plus the people living there know they're leaving in 3 months. So even though the camps worked very well, there were no police removals. You're going to have problems in a camp. There are problems on the streets. We just can't see them until they show up in the emergency room or jail. Yeah.
Let's talk about the Occupy camp for a little while.
Right. I wanted to come to it a little bit, too, to talk about the things that existed there. And the fact that this camp that we're talking about, 93, 95, didn't exist in isolation.
No. Did not.
There have been camps all over town, and we talked about this at the task force, that there are literally hundreds, probably thousands of people camped in Lane County right now in various camps. And the problem is, of course, there are no potties.
Right.
So the disease issues are paramount. There's no dumpsters. Yep. So what do you do with all the garbage, even if you want to be responsible? And the single greatest problem in all of the homeless camps, not only here, but nationally, is police interruption and making the camps go away and have to reestablish somewhere else. They always reestablish.
Well, that's
So
because
there's
the
nothing
people,
served.
Yeah, that's because the people are still here. I mean,
They're still homeless.
Betty Taylor said it. She said it several times.
Mm-hmm.
Where did they go? And one night at the city council meeting, she said, "Are you willing to kill them?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, in other words, you can keep displacing them and displacing them and displacing them. They have no place to go, so they're just going to find another place. And the only way to solve it with that model is to round them up and kill them.
Right.
Are we willing as a society to do that? Is that what we want to do? And there are people that I've spoken to who say, yeah, that's the solution.
That's just fine. I know, and that's frightening.
Yeah.
What the task force is doing, and I think its most important job, is that it gives the city council somebody to listen to.
Yeah.
Besides the people you're talking about. Because the folks you're talking about are generally people that are very high on this crest of profits over people, as we say. So we need a really large group of people, and we had them in the task force, to say, we're a counterbalance to that attitude.
Yep.
We defend your obligation to serve all of the people in Eugene, including the homeless, including those who are psychiatrically disabled, including those who have addiction problems, including those who just got kicked out illegally of their foreclosed home. So we're a counterbalance. You know, we're not the enemy of the council. We're the folks that are going to scream loudly enough from the task force so the council can listen and say, we're going to do this. They can turn to the folks who fund their campaigns or who put social pressure on them and who have a very loud voice and frequency of call. They can turn to them and say, look, these 58 people, representing literally thousands of people, disagree with you.
Yeah.
You know, they're also people we have to respond to. So we're not their enemy. We're their friend. We're the people who say, you can do what you know is right because we're here. We're your supporters too. And I think that's what the task force offers the city council and the mayor is support on the political diameters of things. You wanted to talk about the camp, and I do too, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about this vulnerability to the police for the people who are camping around. The fact that they're also in alleys, they're on back porches, they're everywhere. And part of where they are is downtown. They're downtown during the day. They're there because lane transit's there. Every bus in town goes through there. The library is there, which is one of the few warm places
that they actually get to go into.
To go into. LCC is there. I was shocked at how many of the people who are homeless are actually enrolled in LCC. And of course, most of them are in the downtown campus. So that's there. The diner, the only free hot meal served in this area is downtown.
Outside, opposite the Wow Hall.
Yeah, so everybody, you know, can't be surprised that the homeless are there. And that once there, they interleague, they network, they communicate. They have all the things that they camp with that they have to bring in.
Yeah, they
their
have to haul their entire existence with them.
If they leave it out there, the police will tear it up.
The police will take it, or it won't be there when they come back.
Yeah. So the downtown has, you know, it's had severe problems. I think at one point there were a lot of criminal acts going on. But as you know, we did a pretty intense observation of police reports in January, and we found that in reality, that's citations for crimes, as you and I know them, aren't happening. It's all victimless crimes.
Well, we have a couple things going. Number one, the police, although it's been really difficult to pry information out of them.
Yes, it has.
Okay, but they've actually come out and admitted that while the Occupy camp was open, crime in the downtown dropped by 90%.
That's astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it basically quieted the downtown. And I remember walking around down, and it was deserted. It was quiet.
I know.
Because the people were at the camp. They had a place to be. You know, there's that phrase, a place to be. But they had a place where they could leave their stuff and wander around on their own, and they sort of formed into these little clusters where one person was always in the tents around the tarp, so
Right.
nobody would hassle their stuff. And so they were guarding their little campsite. And so if there were 10 or 12 of them living in this little group, or even more, 20, 25, then 24 of them could go out, and interact with other people while one of them stayed behind.
Right.
And so it simply, now you've got, instead of them pushing shopping carts around and hauling it in backpacks everywhere they go. I mean, one of the big problems with being homeless is your life becomes this series of hauling your stuff from place to place. And you've got a sleeping bag and maybe a tent if you're lucky, and a blanket and some clothes and this and that. And now you have trouble getting on buses.
Right.
Okay. So you've got,
And you frequently have a dog to protect you.
Yes. Dogs are a problem because, to a degree, if the homeless are being harassed, what do they do to protect themselves? They get a dog.
Exactly.
But
to warn them when the police are coming up, or if someone violent is coming up other than a policeman.
And the other thing is choice of what type of dog. So we have lots of pit bulls in the homeless community. Why? Because they're being attacked by the police regularly.
Right. So it's one of those things where
it's an arms race.
Where that's I'd never thought of it that way,
it's an
but
arms
it really
race.
is.
Yeah.
And of course the police always win. That also explains, I think, why so many of the tickets, for instance, I just learned that over by the university, it's illegal to let your dog walk on the sidewalk, a public sidewalk.
Yeah.
And they're trying to pass that for downtown.
Yeah.
That would mean I can't walk downtown with my dog unless I happen to be a legal resident, which I don't know if that means a legal resident of the downtown or a legal resident of anywhere in Eugene or Lane County or Oregon.
Yeah.
That hasn't been said. But the point is that they're just making all these laws. They took out all the benches, Joe.
Well, yeah.
Now, who
Why?
sits
I know
on
that.
benches? People my age.
Yeah.
Most of the homeless are so used to being sitting on the ground or on their duffels, they sit anyway. The only people they've chased away are people like me who are only comfortable on a bench.
Yeah.
And they have the most ridiculous laws, and they're not accidental. Every now and then, someone on the council or someone on staff will seem very surprised. You mean touching a building is criminal trespass too? And I'll say, well, yeah, it is. And you also had to pass something to get 1,000 and something businesses to sign a letter appointing someone else, the policeman, to declare trespass on their property.
Yeah.
And then the police get to interpret it that it's literally touching a building.
Yeah.
So these are all things that they're manufactured, they're artifices under which we can eject the homeless.
Yeah,
but if you've been around, have you noticed that there are no homeless downtown?
Yeah, right. One of the things that when we were doing a little bit of research for this, or just in general, was we came across a report. You remember this, where they talked about the national average number of arrests nationally per police officer, number of arrests in Oregon per police officers, and then there's number of arrests from a Eugene police officer, which is more than twice the national average.
Right.
So what's happening? Are these guys really efficient? Are they super cops? Or are we running a campaign to impose minor crimes on a group of disenfranchised people in order to give them a long rap sheet so we can justify an exclusion?
Yes, the exclusion zone is really one of the most important things that happened for exactly the reason. At first it was for those hardened criminals, but that definition has changed now to chronic offenders. So I have run into people downtown as I was talking to people and trying to interview them. They'll have 15, 20 tickets for jaywalking or crossing against the light or failing to cross at right angles.
And what does this do if they're trying to get off the streets? In other words, if you want to get an apartment or you want to get a job, These days, it's going to be a background check. And
Sure.
what's going to show up? A whole bunch of criminal trespasses.
And
what's that for? Leaning against a building while you
Right.
sleep, sleeping on a heating grate. And so suddenly now you want to get an apartment. We're not renting to you because you got all these criminal trespasses. So they've even created this other barrier to get them off the streets.
At great expense to the city. As we mentioned, a police officer, it cost $250,000 to put one police officer on the ground.
But we've been talking about the general stuff.
Yeah.
And we could keep going on, I'm
Oh,
sure,
yeah.
for a long time. But let's get back to the task
force.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where we're hoping we're going to get some kind of turnaround. The whole process, though, reflected the general attitude, just as we've created all these laws to discriminate against the homeless and to hopefully displace them, which we haven't succeeded in doing. Also on the task force, not among the large number of people who were working on the task force.
But among the small number who controlled it.
Yes.
So, I mean, just as an example, there was a meeting in December, and it was just enormously telling. And they had a lot of, this was between the city workers.
Oh, yeah.
And
just before the camp shut down.
Just before the camp shut down. City workers and all the service providers. And there's about 20 service providers and maybe a dozen city workers there. And so they went around, introduced themselves, and in the first round, the service providers, every single one of them said, don't shut the camp down. Our clients are doing much better. They're saner. Things are much better. Don't shut it down. And so then the nice lady from the city got up and said, what do we have to do to shut the camp down? Okay. To which everyone responded, don't shut it down. Please don't shut it down. It's,
and she responded,
what do we have to do to get the camp shut down?
And she said, and how are we going to transition all these people out of the camp into services? Let's go around and each person tell us what they have. And of course, they went around the entire room. I think they said there were 3 beds available and bus tickets. And that was everything they had to offer.
Well, that's what the city was going to offer.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and all the service agencies.
They're
Then those
they're
were
at peak.
all
They're
the
full.
not-for-profit.
They're at capacity.
It was
They're
all the
delivering-
not-for-profits, not just the ones supported by the city.
Yes.
So it was pretty astounding that after hearing all that, she then went because it's her job. I know this lady. She is a lovely person.
Yeah.
But it's her job.
Yeah.
So she goes back to and says, how are we going to shut the cup down?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what was even more astonishing to me is here were all these incredible service providers.
Yeah.
We'd been out in the field with hundreds of homeless for months. That was the first time those people had been called together. Never had they been. It was the second time they were called together. The first time they were called together had been about 2 weeks before, again to discuss how they were going to shut down the camp. They never pulled them together to talk about how are we going to help this camp.
Yeah, exactly.
It's doing great stuff. Now, a lot of them came out and helped us anyway, but they were doing it on their own time and were almost afraid to be caught out there helping us because of the obvious imperative to shut us down. So all of that mood that you're rightfully constructing here was present at the task force as well.
Exactly. So what would happen is, and I got this all on videotape.
I know.
Okay. So
and we've transcribed a lot of it.
Yeah. And so what would happen is we'd have a meeting and it would talk about we need a place to put the homeless. So we need a camp of some nature where they can leave their stuff and sleep and exist and poo and peep and all that.
Right, because the Mission, the Egan Center, all of those let folks come in around 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, and they have to leave by 8 o'clock the next morning.
So they have to haul their stuff around again with them. So we'd be talking about that, and then the notes from the meeting would have that removed.
And everybody's enthusiasm was in the notes.
Yeah.
But once they were submitted, they disappeared. The
Yeah,
shelter in
the
particular.
shelter disappeared. So we'd come in the next meeting, it would be talked about again, and then the notes, it would disappear. And we'd come in, talk, and the notes would disappear. And the committees, every one of the committees that were focusing on individual areas were talking about that in relationship to a camp.
Right.
So the committees disappeared.
Right.
Okay. And so now it's the same process. The word had come down from the top that there was not to be a camp.
Right, and all the committees were stopped.
And-
We had several meetings, and I called the facilitator because they were supposed to have sent us our next date. And she said, "Oh no, we've decided to cancel that." Who's decided to cancel that?
Yeah.
Well, we just thought it would be better to wait. Well, I said, I don't think so. Let's
Yeah.
go ahead and meet. And then I found out that all the committees had been canceled. And sure enough, we showed up at the next full task force meeting, and it was a brainstorming session.
Yeah.
Everybody moving from station to station, and everything that the committees did was laid aside, and we started from this 0 point of a brainstorming session, and that brainstorming session, without any massaging, laid the groundwork for the rest of the task force. And I think they were just hoping we would forget certain things, that they would get lost
Yeah,
in the shuffle.
right.
But of course they didn't, because it wasn't just a few people.
And
It was almost everyone that wanted this camp.
I think to some extent they were hoping that the task force, that we would run out of energy.
Right.
In other words, that we would go away and they could just cancel it out and
Yeah.
be done. But that didn't happen.
No, it didn't.
No.
And I was really pretty astonished as the reports kept on coming back. And I have to admit, had not some of you who are watchdogging a little better have pointed it out to me, I wouldn't have seen that pattern.
Yeah.
And I think you pointed it out to a number of people who were surprised that it was
I
happening
stood up at the task force and said, "This is happening,
right
guys."
during the public forum.
Yeah.
So it was a hard thing to get our hands on. And then there was a planning committee that met before every task force meeting to kind of try to pull things together and send them on to the task force. But there was never enough time to see that what came out of the planning committee minutes was what had actually happened in the planning committee. So we had more problems there. I missed the last planning committee meeting because I had been scheduled for 2 months to give a speech about Occupy. And I was very surprised that when those planning meeting minutes came out, all of a sudden there was this whole new prioritization
Yeah.
of things that were coming out of this commission that kind of unseated a lot of what had previously been important.
Yep.
The shelter, which had been everyone's kind of number one consideration and had quite healthy descriptions around it, was pretty much, that long a sentence.
Yeah.
In the report. It wasn't very explicit. And the report sounded so bland.
Yeah.
It did have a very good appendix, but it was so bland that I thought, oh my God, all those things that happened,
Yeah.
did they really happen? I actually called somebody and said, I remember this and this and this, but it looks like we didn't get anywhere if you read this report. And so a whole bunch of us sat down and wrote the same things, but in a way that we thought showed the prioritization, showed the excitement, showed how close to fruition, how doable so many of the things were. And that was almost everybody thought that report, which actually pulled into its appendices almost everything in the first report, except those 3 priorities which had been pulled out of thin air. But there was just, again, you could see this fight going on
Yep.
among the very few. I think I have tried to say how many people didn't want to camp.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't call it camp, because I don't know that it'll be a camp per
Camp,
se.
a village,
it has to be
or
something
whatever.
temporary. It has
Yeah.
to be something movable. It has to be something that'll fit around the different zoning and land use things with temporary waivers. But I thought there was real will, for instance, on the mayor's part and on Chris Pryor's part. I was uncertain about Pat Farr's position, but I frequently am. And I thought there was will among, I would say, all but maybe 3 or 4 of the people on that task force. there was one person who just is having a really hard time letting go of the idea that homeless people should live inside in houses, and who kept on repeating that. And I don't think anybody in the room disagreed with her.
Nope.
You know,
it's just the resources are not
the resources
there
aren't
to make
there.
it possible.
And this is a person who has probably done more for homelessness than anybody else in this area.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things that made me sad, is of all the people who had worked the hardest for the homeless were the ones who felt the most threatened by the fact that we had to now do things in a cheaper way.
Well, let's
Because the money's just not available.
well let's look at the framework. I mean,
Yeah.
essentially, what happened is we got to the end, okay, and the same people who had been producing the notes,
Yeah.
who removed the stuff from it.
Constantly.
Why? Because they work for the city. Why? Because the ruling has come down from the city manager that there is
Right.
not to be a camp.
Right.
Okay, so these people who are writing up the notes and writing up the final report have a glaring conflict of interest.
Right.
Okay, they are not representing what went on in that task force, what was
Right.
discussed, what was worked out in the committees, what people brought back. They are filtering it through this, rule that the camp is to disappear.
Well, I got over a lot of naivete.
Yeah.
I have worked with city councils and task forces all over the country in my work as a museum planner. And I have to tell you, I've never seen the subterfuge before that I have seen here. I was just really surprised. A couple of people said, Gene, if you're going to serve on this task force, just be sure that task force members do all the reporting and the write-ups.
Yep.
And forgive me, but I kind of ignored them because we sat in on the meetings. We felt things were so clear.
Yeah.
And so I was really surprised. Interactions with the police have surprised me. I'm turning into a grown-up here in terms of my perspective about city government and about police activity. But I do think we have a lot of support on the council.
Oh, we do. But looking back, I mean, I was sort of blaming some of the city workers and the facilitators. But in the last meeting, it became clear that the facilitators were not part of this.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, it's the question of caballing and, that they were working totally in good faith.
Yes,
and just
I agree
handing
with
this thing
you.
off to people that they believed were working in good faith. Who were sanitizing the reports.
Right.
And so we finally, a week ago from when we're recording this, on Monday, we get this first draft of their report, which is just, unreadable.
Yeah.
And it
They
doesn't
had-
reflect what went on.
No.
And change in phrasing, things that are important become euphemisms, and
Right.
all the rest of that. And I'm reading through this and going, time out. Okay.
Yeah.
This is just plain not repairable.
Yeah.
We start again. And so in the process of doing that, a group of people out of the task force, there were 58 people on the task force, and I guess 17 people from the task force contributed to the second
some way,
document. And so after some serious reluctance and arguing and all the rest, two things happened. Number one, they included it as
After
both.
refusing to at first.
Yeah, as they included both in the document that was handed out. And the other thing is that the first document, which was kind of unacceptable, got revised dramatically.
Yes, it did.
And improved enormously.
It did.
I mean, the thing that we saw on Monday and the thing that we saw on
Friday were totally different.
totally different.
Yeah.
Still not as good as it did. It still did not represent what the task force was about, but it was much closer.
And I think a lot of that happened after they saw our report, because we sent that in about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And they got in at 8, and they had to send the reports out at noon. Well, the supplement was totally revised and submitted to them by noon.
Yeah.
And at 1 o'clock, and 2 o'clock, it still hadn't gone out. The facilitators actually at that point began to play a role I thought was really important. Because at first they were really upset to have something come in at the last moment.
We're ruining the process.
Yeah.
But the process had a conflict of interest built into it from the start.
From the start.
And
what Laurel said, and she was the chief facilitator, she said, well, at first I was just so shocked, but then I read it and I saw, oh, this is done in the right spirit. And I said, but, you know, people from the city council and from the city are saying we're out of process. She said, well, that was my first impression, just because, you know, and I got the idea that it was because nobody wanted the apple cart upset at that point. Right. But she said, it's totally in process. And I said, well, if you will please just keep on reminding people, this was a report that was sent out by a volunteer little committee that had tried to kind of massage it. But it was sent out for input, and all we did is provide input.
Criticism and revisions. That's what you
do.
We provided input, and it just happened to be a total rewrite.
Right, and it was unfortunate that we didn't have more time between the planning committee report and the meeting where we had to make a final decision, because then we could have just sent in remarks. And asked them to do all the rewrite. But instead, I guess a bunch of us stayed up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 nights, to get it written so it could be responded to.
But I think in reality what had to happen was the conflict of interest had to be confronted. And everybody is being nice. And being nice doesn't resolve these issues.
I know I would hear about a meeting in the planning meeting I missed. The main reporting coming out of it was, oh, but it was so friendly and everybody was together. And my response was, of course, but, you know, the homeless came out with their pockets empty. You know, because they let themselves get a little bit browbeat by 1 or 2 people, and that's all it was. And tried to be good people, and there's certainly a big role for us all working together and all being good people, but we can't do it while there's no watchdog in place.
It can't be done at the expense of the truth.
Right, exactly, or even the willingness to confront. We have to be able to learn to respectfully confront. And it's interesting because some of the people who were involved are some of the activists that I respect most in my life. I mean, they're people who have accomplished great things. But there's something about working with task force and the city council, I think, that makes it very hard for all of us to wear our activist hat and not to want to be the people who can advise the council. I think we'd all prefer to be in the role of advisors, which we hope to be in the task force, instead of in the role of watchdog.
But I think that's a really good place for a transition. The only way that you can be in the role of an advisor is if you represent a large block of people. And so the job on our part is we now have to go out. There's huge support for this kind of thing.
There is. I mean,
there are people who get it, that we've literally been spending millions of dollars harassing the homeless, who are still here, hasn't solved the problem. You can't solve the problem until you start killing them. And we're not willing to go down there, and I don't want to go down there. But that's the reality. In other words, the hard-hearted, we're just going to beat them up and take their stuff until they go away, because they can't go away.
And what did it take? It took a man dying to have the Egan Warming Center start. I mean, the Egan Warming Centers are named after him. But the task force has taken some really great steps. Among them is they're saying you've got to keep either this task force or some of its members. I heard a lot of talk about it would be a shame to appoint a whole new commission to take this on now. We should take the people who came to all the meetings and went to all the committee meetings and hung in there and see if they're interested, first of all, and then see how we had to augment that commission. They've also talked about improving health care. Again, the strategies are pretty nebulous. They've talked about changing laws and ordinances because, you know,
that one's huge.
That one's enormous.
It's enormous. And one of the things that would be just immense would be going back and reviewing all those tickets and citations and arrests that have been given to these people and just cancel out the ones that were given purely as a status crime in order to run up a long rap sheet in order to justify an exclusion.
I tell you, it would totally clear the courts, which are running way behind. This is an expensive program.
Yeah, I mean,
because they can't pay their fines.
Yeah.
You know, they can't pay the citation cost $180 a time.
Yeah.
They can't pay it. They don't have the money. So they're not even paying their own court costs.
Right.
And much less for the overnight jail stays. So it's just a really ridiculous situation.
It's a staggering amount of money to accomplish nothing.
Yes.
And to be mean-spirited while doing it.
Well, it makes the homeless extremely angry.
Like,
It makes
duh.
those of us who were previously pretty enchanted with Eugene. I chose Eugene back around the millennium. I didn't grow up here. I chose it. I moved here from Florida. It makes us pretty disillusioned about who we are and what we are. And I think there's just too many of us that are kind of waking up and saying, no, this isn't going to be what we want it to be. You know, I know some of these commissioners, as the council people, as people. You know, they don't want the homeless suffering. You know, they don't know what to do. They know they don't have any money, and they haven't figured out yet that it's not money alone that's the answer. I think our medical tent is one of the most important proofs of that. The medical tent that started in the Occupy camp, all donations. We had volunteer doctors, volunteer nurses, volunteer EMTs. Camp shut down. That's denied to all the homeless. Well, the doctors and the nurses and the dentists were getting a little freaked out because now they were intimately aware of the suffering that's going on.
They had clients.
Yeah, they knew them as people.
Like, we're going to fix this problem, and we're going to do what it takes to fix it. And there's more coming into that group. That group is expanding.
Constantly. And they're going, and another irony, where do they have to give free help? Free medical help. No charge for the doctors, no charge for the medicine, no charge whatsoever. The only place they can do it is on the federal courthouse steps, because it's illegal to put their little tent up, their canopy up, anywhere else in Eugene. It's illegal to give out free medical service in Eugene. You have to go to the federal courthouse. That one is, I think, a real alarming situation. So we're going to fix some of the laws, because the laws, of course, make it impossible for people without homes to sleep anywhere in Eugene. Even lying down on a sidewalk is given a ticket. Even if you're not blocking pedestrian traffic, you're still given a ticket. If you sit down under the eave of a building, that's criminal trespass. So, and the benches have all been removed.
And like, you're supposed to get off the street. I mean, here you are, you're sleep deprived. Okay. Now, what does that do to your sanity?
A lot.
So, you know, it's like the situation is bad enough. And the belief on the part of some of the people that produce this is that people are on the streets because of some choice or because of some moral deficiency or whatever. And the reality is, a lot of them got sick, they got foreclosed on, you know, they lost a job, whatever. A lot of them wind up there. There's students who
a lot of students
who came out of college and into an unemployment rate. I mean, we talk about 8%, 9%.
It's between 15 and 18% real.
In real terms, and younger people are much higher. So you come out of school, okay, to, in reality, 30, 40% unemployment of young people. And now, and of course, you have this pile of student loan you got to deal with.
Right.
And it's like, it doesn't add up, and so poof, now you're either couch surfing or you're on the streets.
So now we've wrapped in the high cost of education and student loans as part of what we at Occupy are worried about. But in addition to all these laws that we're going to change, we wanted to, on the task force, continue and expand the existing services to the homeless. They're providing particularly services to the severely psychiatrically disabled and addicted that they cannot survive on the streets, and they could not be easily incorporated into any camp. And then one of the things I was really excited about is a day-use community center. We do have day-use centers, as you know. The main one's out on Highway 99. It's excellent.
Yep.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that program. But it only serves a few people, a few percentage points. And what it lacks is one of the things that we would like to add in to one that we'd like to put really close to the downtown, so it draws people out of that core.
Yep.
But it's still right there so that they can utilize all the services, including the only free meal in town. But we were hoping, for instance, and this actually was the mayor's suggestion, to have in the front of it, for instance, a coffee shop, so that homeless people and other people could interface. Homeless people could learn some skills in operating a small business, how to be a barista, how to interact with the public. And in the back would be workshops where, now that we can finally in Eugene sell free expression items on the streets, you know, for a long time, to get rid of the homeless again, we passed all these laws that said there would be no sidewalk vending.
Yep.
So, I mean, downtown's gotten just about as boring as it could possibly get. But now, you know Allie Valkyrie, and she challenged that. She's an artist with the Saturday Market, and she challenged the vending laws and has gotten it now, so it's interpreted that anything that's art, that's free expression, can now be vended in our town. So that was a big step. But that's one of the many laws that we need to be looking at as we change. At the day-use community centers, it would be more of a community center than the 99 station. So we'd have place to make artworks, place to make small products, place to do things that station does, laundry, showers, internet.
A place to go to the bathroom.
A place to go to the bathroom is one of the most important things. That just astounded me. I mean, I keep on getting my sensibility shaken that all these years ago we realized people that were homeless were peeing and pooping all over town because there was no place to go to the bathroom.
I mean, if you just look at all these doors, it says no public toilet.
Yeah, no
public restroom.
Yeah.
Okay, restroom for customers only.
So instead of making bathrooms available, we policed it. We made a law against it and gave people tickets.
One of the things that we've been talking to businesses about is an adopt the homeless.
Right.
In other words, find a small group of people and let them use your bathroom.
Right. Just the ones in your neighborhood.
Yeah, just a few. Don't have to give it to everybody, just a few.
Right.
And if enough businesses were to do that, the problem would be solved.
Right. And we've started through David Mandelblatt, who's the president of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, and Smudge, who is one of the remarkable homeless people we encountered, have started these community conversations where several people from the downtown who officially live there and those who are, you know, hanging out there because that's where they need to be during the day are getting together for a meal and getting to know each other. And there's a plan now to really expand this program. There's a lot of good things happening independently of the task force, Joe, and one of my gravest concerns right now is how do we give the city council enough support so that they can move forward with this day center, with these law changes, and with a shelter of some kind.
Well, some of this stuff is in motion. You know, we do have conversations with the police. I think that it's our job to work with the police to get them to the point where they sell this camp for us.
I do too, because I think we have the listening circle taking place between 8 of the commanders from EPD and from 8 folks from Occupy to get together and talk about what are the things we have in common, what would we like to see happening, particularly with a focus on downtown, as well as in the relations between Occupy and the police. And I think that, if anything, Pete and Sam Kamkar and Jennifer Beals, and I've recently met Scott Fellman. I think all of these people's hearts are in the right place, but none of us knows exactly what to do. The camp at Occupy proved something. It had a lot of problems because it's people with problems.
Huge problems.
You know. But it also started finding some solutions. And I think we all want to mine that experience for the part that was good.
See, the thing that I look at, I mean, we had people who got clean and sober. We got people who made it into housing.
A lot.
It was just enough of a leg up for them to get off the streets. But the issue was when people sort of came there at the beginning. Okay, oh, here's a safe place, and we're gonna have a party.
Right.
And the party ran 24 hours until a lot of them started to notice, well, hey, you know, it'd be nice to actually get some sleep. And so as a result of that, they, with a little help, generated a community agreement. And, you know, got it signed. And the first night, of course, there's a bunch of people who didn't bother to live up to the agreement that they had just signed. Well, the following morning, they found themselves out of the camp. Okay? And the following 2 days, the place was dead quiet.
It was wonderful.
It was at night. You know, there were quiet hours at night, and then the police moved in. And disrupted the camp.
I remember those nights so well because I used to go down with Lucy and my partner and take our lawn chairs, and we'd sit in the main path of the camp at night because it was very active at night. And I remember, and it was wonderful, the stories and just getting to be with the people and singing songs in Spanish and all of these things. And I remember the night after the exodus of the people who were causing all the problems, just standing in the center of that camp and 300 people in their tents and warm sleeping bags, full bellies, and you could literally just feel the camp breathing. I mean, it was so peaceful, so beautiful, and had been earned over such hard times.
But that was
and then we were busted up.
And that was self-organization. That was a group of people saying, okay, it is in our interest to keep this thing together. And they made it happen, and they can be proud of that.
I think it's a very important thing for the community as they look at what the task force has recommended, particularly in regard to the camp, that this is no intent to be any way, shape, or form an Occupy-style camp. It is, Occupy happened spontaneously with no planning.
It was a protest.
Incredible. Yes, it was a protest.
And
all the homeless joined it because who has more to protest than the homeless? And they've become some of our most effective protesters. But this camp is going to be something very different. We hope it'll have the horizontal relationships in it, that it won't be a paternalistic top-down management system. We're going to have to see how that evolves because that was a point of dissension.
A lot of it's going to be people from the community helping to make it happen. But staying out of the way.
Staying out of the way is a big one. Not knowing it all is a big one. So it's going to be really exciting to see, but it's pre-planned. My biggest goal in life right now is to get Sam Carr, Cam Carr, and Pete Kearns to understand the potential this camp has for them, because they're having to ask police officers to do things police officers don't want to do. Most of them, there are a few, of course, there's a few bad apples in anything. I don't care if it's teachers or police officers or doctors. But most of those guys do not want to be doing what they want to do, what they're being asked to do.
You know, I enjoyed, you know, a lot of the people the police that I met on the site, I mean, are really outstanding human beings. But
they are, but
there's a few.
They're part of a military environment.
So we got about another 30 seconds. So
okay, so we want folks to learn about this task force work, to support the city councilors who want to support it, make it possible for them to approve these recommendations.
Help make the camp happen.
Yes.
I mean, that's the game, and we're going to be at it. Summer's coming. We're going to be knocking on doors. We're going to be talking to people. So you've just survived another episode of Occupy TV and with Gene Stacey
and Joe
Tyndall. And come back, see us next time, and good night.
How long?
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children.